the ocean that keeps the city of light. There are nights when the ocean seems almost human, when its surface, smooth and glimmering under the silver hush of the moon, breathes as if remembering. You stand at its edge, the air heavy with salt and silence, the horizon a single dark thread between two infinities. Somewhere beneath that surface, it is said, lies a city that once shone brighter than the constellations it mirrored. They called it Lumen Mare, the city of light, a place where streets were carved from crystal and towers rose like frozen hymns. Even now, fishermen who sail too far from shore claim to see faint glows flickering below, as if candles were still burning in submerged windows. The sea, restless yet loyal, keeps its secret well. The waves that kiss the sand tonight are the same that swallowed that city whole. A city that once believed light could be harnessed, stored, and sung into being. Some say it fell to hubris, others to time. But those who listen more carefully believe it simply chose to sleep. You close your eyes and imagine the descent. The first thing you feel is not cold, but weight, the weight of water, of centuries pressing softly against your skin. Shafts of moonlight filter down like strands of glass, and beneath them, shadows begin to take shape. Columns emerge from the dark, draped in coral and silence. Archways curve like the ribs of some great celestial creature. And between them, fragments of mosaics glimmer faintly, blues and golds that once told stories of an age when humans spoke to the stars. Historians have argued for centuries about the city of light. Some located in the depths off the coast of Cyprus, where divers have found curious ruins shaped like concentric circles. Others point to the Straits of Gibraltar, near where Plato once whispered of Atlantis. But the truth refuses to stay still. Each expedition returns with a different map, a different myth, a different piece of the same impossible puzzle. The ocean, after all, has never cared for certainty, preserves what it loves and blurs what it fears to lose. As you drift deeper into the story, the city begins to stir. In your mind's eye, its avenues awaken under pale radiance. You can almost hear the hum, not of machinery, but of resonance, of light vibrating like music. Scholars once believed the people of Lumen Mare discovered a way to capture the energy of starlight itself. They built towers not to dominate the heavens, but to mirror them, each structure aligned to a constellation, each chamber designed to echo celestial harmonies. To walk through that city was to walk through the reflection of the night sky. Yet all light carries a shadow. Perhaps the city shone too brightly. Legends tell that one night, a new star appeared above the ocean, brighter than all others, and the people gathered to celebrate it, believing it to be a sign of eternal illumination. But by dawn, the sea began to tremble. Waves rose higher, not with rage, but with purpose. The city's foundations, once thought eternal, began to dissolve as if returning home. In their final hours, the citizens lit their towers one last time, sending their glow upward through the water. A farewell that turned the entire sea into a mirror of gold. Some say the ocean pitied them, that it cradled their light instead of crushing it. That is why, on rare nights when the moon is full and the wind sleeps, the deep still glows faintly, as if their lanterns are still burning far below, undying and unashamed. You linger there, listening to the slow rhythm of the tide, the breath of something ancient and alive. You wonder if the city is truly gone, or if it waits, preserved beneath miles of quiet blue, its streets dusted with starlight, its doors sealed with time. The world above has forgotten its language, but perhaps the sea remembers every syllable. Perhaps that is why its song changes each night, sometimes sorrowful, sometimes tender, always speaking in tones too low for words. And so you stand, the waves lapping at your feet, the sky trembling with distant constellations. The city of light remains unseen, but not unfelt. Its memory shimmering through the water, through your breath, through the long echo of everything that once dared to shine. When the night is clear and the stars lean close, the surface becomes a mirror of both sky and memory. The constellations tremble there, woven together with reflections of unseen faces. It feels, for a moment, as though the world above and the world below are the same, one remembering the other. And as dawn comes, The mist lifts, the light shifts, and the river carries on, unchanged yet different, ancient yet newborn. Its waters move with quiet assurance, tracing the long path from mountain to sea, from what was to what will be. Perhaps that is what remembrance truly is. Not the act of holding on, but the act of flowing forward without losing what shaped you. The river knows this. It does not fight the current. It simply moves, patient and infinite, carrying the memory of everything it has ever touched. And if you stand still long enough at its edge, breathe, listen, and let your reflection settle, you might feel it too. The gentle pull of something vast, remembering you back. There is a small walled garden hidden behind the ruins of an abandoned palace. A place the wind seems to avoid, where even the air moves slowly, as though reluctant to disturb what lingers there. The gates are of iron, rusted and delicate, shaped into vines that have forgotten their own pattern. No birds sing here. The silence is not empty, but watchful, as if the earth itself is holding its breath. They say the garden does not grow as others do. Its rhythm is reversed. Flowers do not bloom toward the sun. They fold inward, revealing their colors only in shadow. Leaves retreat into buds, vines coil back toward their roots, and blossoms dissolve into seed before dawn. By morning, the soil lies bare, a clean, dark surface untouched by time. And yet by nightfall, the air fills again with scent, with movement, with the faint shimmer of life assembling itself in reverse. The few who have entered describe the experience as standing inside a memory being unwound. The air feels heavier near the center, as though thick with years. The ground glows faintly, not with light, but with a kind of remembrance, a pulse beneath the soil. The plants hum at the edge of hearing, low and tender, like a song being sung backward. When the wind does pass through, it carries a fragrance both familiar and impossible. The scent of something once loved, now returning to its beginning. No one knows who first planted this place. Some say it was the last queen of the palace, who tended it in her grief after her kingdom fell to dust. The legend tells that she wished for time to reverse, for her losses to unhappen, for the world to close its wounds. Her tears salted the soil, and the garden answered. Others believe it is far older, a remnant of an ancient rite, a mirror to the cycles of creation, meant to teach the living that endings are not death, but remembrance finding its way home. Scholars who have studied the soil found no roots beneath the surface, only fine white threads that turn to ash when touched. Botanists say such growth is impossible. Yet the scents they've catalogued here do not exist anywhere else on Earth. Traces of saffron and cedar, rose and myrrh, mingled with something like rain on stone. When they left, their instruments recorded a faint heartbeat beneath the earth, rhythmic and slow, pulsing like sleep. At the garden center stands an empty pedestal of marble, cracked and half-buried. Its surface bears a faint inscription in a language older than script, a looping line of symbols that spiral inward, disappearing into a single point. When traced by hand, the stone feels warm, almost alive. It seems to hum under the touch, resonating softly, as though listening. Perhaps it was never meant to be found again. Perhaps its purpose was not to endure, but to remind that even when light falls and the world forgets, beauty does not vanish. It only sinks deeper, beyond reach, into the quiet places where dreams wait to be remembered. One traveler, a woman whose name has been lost to time, wrote that she spent 3 nights there. She said that on the second night, she watched a rose reverse its own decay, the petals lifting, smoothing, regaining their color until they shone like embers. By dawn, it was gone. On the third night, she dreamed of walking through the garden as a child, though she had never been there before. The flowers whispered in a voice she somehow recognized. When she awoke, the garden was still and perfect, and she was holding a seed in her hand. She planted it beyond the gate in ordinary soil. Nothing grew. Perhaps the seed refused the forward flow of time. Or perhaps it chose to stay behind, waiting for another age to move backward toward it. Today, the garden remains untouched. The palace around it has crumbled into the dust of centuries, but its walls stand whole, veined with ivy that blooms in moonlight and withers at dawn. Those who visit say that entering feels like stepping into a slow exhale, into the quiet sigh between what was and what will be. Some stay for hours without realizing it. Others claim that a single moment there can stretch into a lifetime. When the wind does return, rarely softly, it carries petals across the stones like small, luminous echoes. They fall into the cracks and disappear, as though rejoining something deeper beneath. Perhaps this garden is not a place of growing at all, but a remembrance of all that once was alive and loved. A sanctum where time unravels itself gently, returning every bloom to its seed, every scent to its breath, every sorrow to its beginning. And if you stand quietly, in the blue hush before dawn, you might see it, the last petal closing, the air folding inward, the world inhaling once more. The garden sleeps, not in death, but in return. This beauty lies not in what it becomes, but in what it releases. For in the end, all life bends backward, toward its first light, its first warmth, its first breath. On the western cliffs where the ocean swells meet the wind, there lies a single stone, large as an altar, smooth as breath. It sits alone at the edge, half buried in moss and time, staring out into the endless horizon. To most, it is just another relic of the earth's long patience. But those who linger until dusk say it lives. For when the sun begins its slow descent and the air turns to amber, the stone begins to hum. It is not loud, nor is it music as we know it. The sound is felt more than heard, a low vibration that moves through the ground, through the soles of your feet, through the chest, like the echo of a voice too vast to belong to one throat. The villagers who live below the cliffs call it the stone that remembers the sun. They believe it sings not to the sky above, but to the light itself, a farewell offered each evening as the world darkens. The stone's surface bears carvings, faint and delicate, almost erased by salt and centuries. Spirals, waves, and what seem to be constellations, lines of connection joining stars that no longer exist. Scholars have studied them for decades, finding in their geometry hints of lost calendars, lunar alignments, and forgotten rites. But none have been able to explain the sound. The tide sighs one last time, retreating into shadow. The horizon fades. The ocean, faithful and infinite, closes its palms around the city of light. One geologist once camped beside it for a full season, measuring resonance and air temperature, studying the seabirds that nested nearby. Each dusk, the same thing. The hum beginning softly as the first star appeared, rising in tone until the last edge of sunlight vanished beneath the sea, then fading into silence. He discovered no hollow beneath, no mechanism, no natural explanation. On his final night, he wrote in his notebook only 5 words: "The stone knows we're here." There are legends older than memory that speak of the stone as a sentinel, a remnant of a vanished people who spoke with the wind. They believed that everything in the world had a tone, a frequency that tethered it to the divine. When a living thing died, its tone did not disappear but was absorbed by the world around it, in air, in rock, in water. The stone, they said, was the keeper of these tones, the point where the earth's voice and the ocean's heartbeat met. Some evenings, when the tide is low, the hum deepens, and those who listen claim to hear within it layers of sound. Not words, but shapes of emotion. Sorrow and devotion, longing and rest. It is as though the entire history of the world, the rise and fall of kingdoms, the laughter of children, the sighs of lovers, the silence of graves, has condensed into this single note. At twilight, light bends strangely around it. The stone glows faintly, though it reflects no fire and casts no shadow. Travelers describe feeling weightless in its presence, as if gravity itself softens. One woman, a musician who had lost her hearing years before, visited after hearing the stories. She sat beside it for hours, eyes closed, hands pressed to the surface. When she returned home, she could not hear voices, but she could hear the ocean again. The villagers treat the stone with quiet reverence. They leave offerings at its base, candles that burn low against the wind, bits of driftwood, letters written in salt water and folded into the earth. None are taken and none are moved. When storms approach, the villagers climb the cliff and sit beside the stone, believing that its song will keep the sea calm. Often it does. In recent years, researchers recorded the sound. When played back in a laboratory, it revealed something strange. Within the hum were harmonic patterns matching the resonant frequencies of the human heart. As if the stone were tuned, not by accident, but by intent. The scientist who discovered it said quietly, "It sings like something that once was alive. At the edge of dusk, the moment always arrives. The brief, golden trembling before the sun disappears completely. The hum swells, filling the air with warmth that feels like memory itself. Then, just as darkness settles, it fades, replaced by the whisper of the sea. The waves strike the cliff below, echoing the same rhythm, as if answering. Perhaps the stone is not mourning the day's end, but celebrating its return. Perhaps it does not sing to the sun at all, but to the light that lingers within every living thing, reminding us that endings are simply another form of resonance. When night fully arrives, the cliff cools, and the ocean quiets. The stone grows still, absorbing the starlight that falls upon it like dust. Its silence now feels sacred, full rather than empty. It waits, patient as the tide, until another dusk arrives, until the light finds it again. And when it does, when the sun once more kisses the horizon and breathes its last warmth across the sea, the stone will hum again, slow, tender, eternal, carrying the song of everything that ever lived into the falling night. And in that silence, vast, luminous, eternal, the world exhales. At the edge of a forgotten coastline, where fog drifts like sleep over the water, there lies a harbor that no ship has entered for centuries. Its piers lean into the sea like tired hands, the wood grayed by salt and silence. The air smells faintly of iron and rain. Even in daylight, the port feels haunted by dusk. But when night comes, the horizon blooms with light, hundreds of lanterns floating on the tide, moving slowly toward the unseen distance. No one knows who releases them. There are no villages nearby, no fishermen left to tend their boats. The cliffs above are empty, the roads swallowed by ivy and time. And yet, every evening when the first star appears, the lights begin to rise, one by one, drifting from beneath the waves as if memory itself had learned to float. They call it the Port of Souls. Sailors from generations past spoke of it in low voices, tracing its outline on sea charts only in ink the color of smoke. They believed the lanterns marked the path for ships lost at sea, that each flame belonged to a life claimed by the water. But others said the truth was older, gentler, that the port was built by a people who refused to forget their dead, who sent lanterns to guide them home every night until memory itself became ritual. Archaeologists once found remnants of this forgotten place. Stone foundations beneath the sand, a bell tower toppled into the surf, and carved symbols of waves wrapped around eyes. The inscriptions spoke of the horizon that breathes, and of the light that returns. None of the words were warnings. They read like lullabies. When you stand at the shoreline, you can still hear the faint creak of unseen wood, the sigh of ropes tightening in wind that no longer blows. The lanterns drift closer then, fragile globes of amber light, flickering just below the surface before rising like slow stars. Some are small, dim, and steady. Others flare with sudden brilliance, as though a memory has just awakened. And though they never touch, their reflections gather on the water, forming the faint outline of a harbor that is no longer there. On calm nights, the sea becomes a mirror, and the sky leans close. It is hard to tell which is which, whether the lanterns float on the water or among the stars. Sometimes, the lights move in rhythm, pulsing softly, like the ocean's heartbeat. Those who have watched long enough swear they see shapes between them, faint silhouettes of ships without sails, drifting silently beside the glow. One story tells of a captain whose vessel vanished in a storm not far from this coast. Years later, his daughter came searching, guided only by rumor. She arrived at night and saw the lanterns scattered across the bay like a constellation fallen from heaven. Among them, one glowed brighter than all the rest, steady, patient, near the center of the current. She followed it, wading into the cold water until it hovered just beyond her reach. Then it dimmed, flickered once, and disappeared. By dawn, she was found asleep on the sand, her face turned toward the sea, her expression serene. She never returned to the port, but in her old age, she would whisper, "He found his way home." Scientists, of course, have their explanations: luminous plankton, methane ignition, underwater gas vents. But none of their theories account for the order of the lights, for the way they rise in the same rhythm each night, beginning at the farthest edge of the bay and moving inward, as if guided by an invisible hand. Nor do they explain the faint hum that accompanies them, a sound like breathing or like wind through distant rigging. When storms roll across the horizon, the lanterns do not vanish. They gather instead, closer, brighter, their glow visible even through rain. The sea thrashes, the wind howls, but the lights remain unbroken, holding the darkness at bay. When dawn finally comes, they fade all at once, sinking into the water like embers drawn back into ash. The people who live along this coast leave offerings at low tide: shells, bits of rope, small candles in glass jars. They say it is unwise to speak loudly here, that the sea remembers every word, and that the lanterns rise not for mourning, but for conversation, between the living and the lost. Some believe that if you whisper the name of someone you've loved and let the wind carry it toward the waves, one of the lights will flicker in answer. On a wooden table lit by a single candle, an old map curls at its edges the way autumn leaves curl toward sleep. The room is small, and the night presses gently against its shutters, listening. You can smell resin and salt, ink and ash, the slow breath of parchment that has known many hands. At the center of the table lies a compass whose needle does not point north but turns, almost tenderly, in an endless spiral. Beside it, a quill rests in a shallow bowl of black glimmer, and a name, smudged and star-marked, wavers in the pool of light. This is where the cartographer kept his vigil, where he drew coastlines that seemed to lean inward like listening faces, where he traced rivers that began in mist and ended in silence. Tonight, the map looks as if it might speak. Perhaps that is all this port ever was, a threshold, a breathing space between presence and absence, where love refuses to fade. When the last lantern sinks and the sea returns to darkness, the air feels thick with something unsaid. Not sorrow, but peace. The kind of peace that belongs to endings that are not endings at all. And if you stand long enough, you may notice the faintest glimmer returning far out on the horizon, as though the ocean itself were lighting another candle, one more for the memory of light. And now the night has gathered all its stories. The sea lies quiet. The winds have folded their wings. You have walked through cities that dreamed, through temples that waited, through rivers that remembered their own names. You have touched the salt of centuries and the breath of stars. You have listened to the hum of stone and the whisper of forgotten gates. The world has dimmed around you, softened by the rhythm of old things remembering themselves. You can feel it now, that slow, patient pulse beneath everything. It is the same heartbeat that echoed in the bells beneath the lake, the same hush that moved through the desert's hidden arch. He believed the world was not a flat certainty but a veiled arrangement of echoes, that the true border of any known shore folded back on itself like a prayer. He studied the old portolan charts, with their windrose bursts and spidering rum lines, and the pages of Ptolemy, patient with their measured grids. He copied, then diverged. He turned the stars into distances and the distances into breath. He whispered to the forgotten pilots who had trusted the swell, the tide, the swan-bone curve of the horizon. He marked faint islands where sailors swore lanterns burned at noon beneath the waves. He read of strangers who steered by the drifting kelp and the song of unseen birds, and he wrote their testimonies in the margins, small, reverent, like the notes a monk might leave in a psalter. The same breath that lingered in the library of dust and air. All these places, the city beneath the waves, the temple of waiting salt, the garden that unbloomed into silence, they are not far away. They live in the folds of the mind, in the soft corridors we enter when the day finally loosens its grip. Each dream, each image was only a door, and through each door, The same light waited, the same ancient stillness calling you home. The night is no longer a thing to cross, but a place to rest. You are among kind company now, the dreamers of Ellora, the keepers of bells and maps. One winter, when the harbor froze and bells rang with a dull oceanic grief, he began to draw a coast unlike any other. It did not recede into the white emptiness beyond the map's edge. It curled inward, a careful spiral, as if the world were a shell and the sea a listening ear. Each night, he added a grain of shoreline, a hush of dune, a river that braided like the filament of a dream. He turned the candle low and waited for the ink to dry. The more the coast curved, the quieter the room became, until even his own breathing felt like a trespass. The hands that once built temples of sound and faith, all of them are here, murmuring gently beneath your breath, reminding you that nothing truly vanishes, that every whisper finds its way back to the ear that loved it. So breathe deeply. Let the weight of the day drift from your shoulders. Let the tide of sleep move through you like the old river, carrying you forward, carrying you home. Do not chase it. Simply listen. Some said he sought the Mare Tenebrarum, that old ocean of medieval rumor, the sea of darkness that sailors approached as one approaches a cathedral's void, with awe, with fear, with a hope that cannot be spoken. Others said he had found an old note in a monastery's archive, where a monk had described a sky in which certain stars moved against expectation, and he had taken it as a sign that the heavens were not only above us, but within us, turning. He did not argue. He only kept drawing. For the world is still singing, even when you cannot hear it. It hums through water and stone, through lanterns on dark seas, through houses that wait for footsteps and hearts that still remember. And in that hum, low, eternal, endless, there is a promise that nothing sacred is ever lost, that every light finds its way back to the shore, that even now, as your eyes grow heavy, if you lean close now, you can see his symbols, a gate, barely scratched into the vellum, where the compass rose should be, a small spiral that interrupts a chain of islands like a breath between two vows, a crescent tucked at the edge of a river delta, where the current arrays itself like feathers, tiny crosses where ships were lost, not emphatic, not tragic, just acknowledgments of a fact, that to move toward the unknown is to accept a certain kind of quiet. In the lower margin, near a smudge that once was a tear or a spill of water, he copied a phrase from an older hand. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. You are part of the same quiet music, the same ancient dream, the same silence that remembers. Sleep now. The stories will keep watch. The night will hold you. And the ocean, the one that keeps the city of light, will cradle you softly until morning. He anchored his measurements in something gentle and real, in the way the moon leaned on the tide, in how a storm redrew the coastline overnight. He noted that mariners in the Levant once sailed by the scent of resin and distant groves, that Norse pilots listened for breakers long before they were visible. He scribbled a memory of Fra Mauri's great circular chart, where the world is a wheel of patience. He drew a small device that looked a bit like the Antikythera mechanism, cogs like prayer beads, time nested within time. Nothing was certain. Everything was faithful. It is said that one spring he left with a small crew and a vessel barely larger than a chapel. He took the spinning compass and a copy of the spiral map, folded like an old letter. They sailed not by bearings but by breath, catching winds that felt like recollections, slowing when the sea exhaled and the gulls fell silent. On the third night, the water glassed to stillness, and the stars descended as if to rest on the mast. The crew swore they saw the horizon turn, not the way a wheel turns, but the way a thought turns toward its beginning. They spoke softly, as if any loud word might break the surface of something sacred. He did return, for a brief month, thinner and kind, eyes filled with the moon's residue. He said little. He added one line to the map, the final curve that closed the spiral, and then he vanished the way mist vanishes from a field at dawn, not gone exactly but placed back where it belongs. In the corner of the room, the compass kept turning, obedient to a north no chart had ever named. Now the candle is nearly finished. The map breathes in the draft, lifting and settling like a sleeper. If you trace the spiral with your fingertip, you may feel a soft resistance, as though the vellum remembers the hand that made it. You follow the coast inward, through estuaries like silver ribs, past capes named for constellations, along a sea marked only with a single word: listening. At the spiral's heart, there is no city, no harbor, no flag. Only a glyph that looks like a gate drawn in starlight. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps maps are not lanterns but litanies, a way to speak the world into a quieter courage. The old cartographer seemed to know that discovery has many doors, and not all of them open outward. Some open inward, toward a shore made of memory, where the tide is thought, and the wind is prayer, and the stars, patient and oceanic, are not above us but among us, turning their slow wheels through the rooms of the heart. You fold the map. You pinch the candle's last blue flame. In the darkness that follows, the room feels larger, as if the walls have stepped back to make a path. The compass turns once more, then rests. And in that rest there is a soft, ancient assurance, a breath at the edge of sleep. The world is wider than its edges, and kinder than its names, and some directions are only given when our eyes are closed. Perfect. I'll carry the same rhythmic stillness, candlelit pacing, and quiet factual grounding from the first 2 chapters. Here is your next segment. There are deserts that do not sleep. Even when the moon withdraws and the wind ceases to move, the dunes continue their slow breathing, long, patient sighs that shift centuries grain by grain. On such a night, the sand glows faintly under a sky cold with stars, and the earth seems to hum with memory. It is here, beyond the known caravan routes, that a gate once revealed itself. Not a ruin exactly, but a pause in the endlessness. A shape half-buried, black as cooled ash, its archway rimmed with carvings too smooth to have been made by human hands. The first to find it were not explorers but shepherds. They spoke of a stone door that sang when the desert wind passed through its curve. Years later, an archaeological team followed their stories, setting their camp among the whispering dunes. The air tasted of tin and salt, the sand sometimes warm as if remembering the day's light. They brushed away layers of dust, their lamps throwing trembling halos over the stones. What emerged was an arch of obsidian, impossibly polished, marked by lines of ancient script. Not hieroglyph, not cuneiform, but something older, softer, like the ripples left by water. It was said to belong to the lost civilization of Iram, the city of pillars whispered of in both Bedouin lore and the old Quranic surahs. A city punished or perhaps preserved, for its pride, swallowed by storm and silence. The scientists kept their notes, made sketches, measured the resonance when struck with a tuning fork. Yet none of their instruments could explain why the temperature dropped each evening when the sun touched the horizon, nor why their voices seemed to echo even when spoken softly. Each night, the desert moved closer, reclaiming what had been revealed. The wind came low and mournful, and the sand traced new lines along the gate's curve. One of the younger researchers swore she saw light beneath it, a slow pulse, like the heart of the world beating behind a veil. Another claimed that in his dreams he walked through the arch into a corridor of amber dust, where shadows moved with purpose but no form. He woke with sand in his hair and the taste of salt on his tongue, though there had been no sea for 1,000 miles. In daylight, they recorded what they could. The gate's lintel bore 7 concentric circles, each filled with tiny dots like constellations. The alignment matched no known star map, yet when traced onto paper and overlaid upon the desert's own horizon, it mirrored the curve of the Milky Way. Someone whispered that it was not a gate to enter, but a gate to listen through, a threshold meant for voices too old for breath. Others dismissed it, returning to their careful grids and tools, though their hands trembled as they worked. When a storm came, sudden and immense, it carried the scent of rain that never fell. They covered their equipment and huddled inside their tents, listening as sand struck fabric with the sound of distant applause. By morning, the gate was half buried again. Only its topmost arc remained visible, glistening faintly in the early light. They dug once more, slower now, gentler, as if unwrapping something sacred. Beneath the surface, they found nothing beyond the stone. No chamber, no stair, just sand, infinite and unyielding. The lead archaeologist, a man who had spent 40 years unearthing temples and tombs, wrote a single line in his journal before they left. The entrance leads inward, not beneath. He died a year later, his notes scattered like leaves across his study. Among them was a pressed sprig of desert grass, brittle yet fragrant, found near the gate. It smelled faintly of the sea. Even now, satellites pass above that barren expanse, mapping ridges and dunes, measuring wind paths and mineral shifts. Yet none reveal the black arch. It appears only when the air stills, when the dunes align to the rhythm of the stars, and the night deepens enough to remember. Locals say that if you press your ear to the sand and wait, you can hear it. A low vibration, like the sound of a bell heard from underwater. Perhaps the gate was never meant to open. Perhaps it is not even a door, but a mirror, reflecting what lies beneath the dust within us. Our longing for beginnings we cannot recall. The desert, kind and merciless, keeps such secrets well. It buries without cruelty, preserves without permission. And sometimes, when the wind stops, and the stars lean close enough to see themselves in the dunes, you may glimpse the faint outline of that arch again. Dark against the moonlit expanse, patient as eternity, listening for the footsteps that may never come. Perhaps that is enough, to know that somewhere under the sleeping sand, a gate still waits, not to be crossed, but to remind us that silence, too, is a kind of passage. High in the mountains where clouds gather like unspoken prayers, there stands a temple carved entirely from salt. It does not shine like marble, nor crumble like limestone. It glows faintly, as though the memory of sunlight still lingers within it. For centuries, it has waited in solitude, its walls glistening with the residue of forgotten hands, its corridors echoing only the wind. The villagers who live in the valley below call it Dar al-Matar, the house of rain, though none have ever seen water fall upon its roof. They say the temple was built in an age when the sky itself was a god. Pilgrims climbed the mountain with offerings of silver and stone, whispering to the heavens for mercy, for harvest, for forgiveness. Inside the shrine, a single basin stood at the center, dry, unfilled, yet worshipped as a promise. When the first true rain touches this bowl, the inscription reads, "The world shall remember its beginning." At dusk, the temple hums with the faint sweetness of minerals and dust. The air tastes alive, trembling between absence and arrival. Travelers who approach it often speak of hearing soft music, not of instruments, but of vibrations through the stone itself, as if the mountain were breathing. And when the moon rises, the walls turn translucent, revealing veins of crystal that seem to flow inward, not outward, like rivers running home. Scholars believe the temple was built by the salt artisans of the ancient Indus Valley, a lost sect who shaped minerals as others shaped clay. There are references to such a sanctuary in Sumerian trade tablets, mentioning a house upon the high road of storms. Yet others insist the structure predates language entirely, a remnant of something older than belief, a place where the earth and sky once spoke directly. Every year, a few wanderers make the climb. They come not for evidence but for silence, for the hush that lives between two heartbeats of thunder. One such traveler, a historian named Lala, described her journey in a weathered journal found decades later. She wrote of the ascent, of clouds dissolving into ribbons of silver mist, of her breath joining the cold air like incense. At the final ridge, she looked down upon the temple, its spires glinting faintly beneath the starlight. She wrote, "It seemed less a building than a thought made visible, as if the mountain itself were dreaming." Inside, the floor shimmered with salt dust that clung to her boots. She traced the carvings on the walls, spirals, droplets, hands cupped toward the sky. Every symbol turned inward, toward the empty basin at the center. She knelt beside it, her reflection faint in the pale crystal, and felt a strange heaviness in her chest. Not grief, but recognition. The silence was thick, ancient, immense. When she whispered her name aloud, the sound dissolved before it reached the air. That night the wind rose. The mountain sighed as it always had, and the first cloud lowered, swollen but unyielding. No rain fell, yet the basin glimmered as if remembering water. Lale wrote of a faint warmth that gathered in the temple's heart, a soft luminescence pulsing through the salt walls, as though, she wrote, the temple were breathing with me. No one saw her again after that night. The next expedition found only her satchel, resting by the threshold, covered in a thin crust of frost. Her notebook lay open to a final line. The sky does not forget. It only waits until we are quiet enough to listen. Today, the temple remains untouched. The storms pass above it, heavy with promise, but never release their tears. Perhaps the rain it waits for is not the rain that falls, but the rain that remembers, the first condensation of creation, the whisper that divided sea from sky. Some say the mountain's salt keeps the clouds at bay, sealing the moment forever in suspension. Others think it is mercy, that the temple has been spared the dissolution it was built to receive. Sometimes, in the deepest blue before dawn, when mist curls along the ridges like smoke from an ancient altar, the air grows heavy with scent. Not salt, but petrichor, the ghost of rain. In those rare hours, the basin fills with light instead of water, glowing softly as if from within. Then, as the sun rises, it fades, leaving behind a single drop of dew, trembling like a tear that refuses to fall. Perhaps the temple's waiting is its worship. Perhaps it was never meant to melt or to end, but to hold the ache of expectancy itself, to remind us that longing can be holy, that patience too can be a prayer. The wind moves again through its hollow corridors, singing low through the salt columns. The mountain hums. The sky remains unbroken, vast and kind. And somewhere within that suspended silence, the temple still waits, not for rain, but for remembrance. There is a valley somewhere between forgetting and remembrance, where the air itself seems to shimmer with quiet intent. The path that leads there is narrow and uncertain, lined with thorns that have never known bloom, and stones that crumble softly underfoot. At its heart, surrounded by cliffs the color of faded parchment, lies the library, not of books, but of breath. No one knows who built it or when. There are no doors, only openings where the wind moves freely, carrying whispers through its endless chambers. The walls are carved into the living rock, honeycombed with alcoves that once held scrolls. Now they hold only dust, fine, golden dust that dances in the shafts of light as if reluctant to settle. The silence inside is not empty. It is dense, like incense, filled with what was once spoken, what was once known. It is said that the Library of Breath was the last sanctuary of a civilization that believed words were alive, that every utterance was a living entity, and every breath released into the world carried memory. They wrote not to preserve, but to return knowledge to the air, trusting that the wind would carry it to those who were ready to listen. For generations, their scholars exhaled history itself, their teachings, their secrets, their songs, until the very air of the valley was thick with wisdom invisible. Travelers who reach this place do not read. They inhale. They stand still, eyes closed, and let the air pass through them. Some claim to feel the faint hum of languages long extinguished vibrating against their ribs. Others speak of sudden understanding, as if a door inside their mind had been opened by unseen hands. But when they descend the mountain again, the words fade, leaving behind only a tenderness, the memory of something once known. Archaeologists have found traces here. Fragments of clay tablets eroded beyond translation, carvings of spirals and lungs, symbols of breath and wind. In one inscription, almost lost to time, are the words, "To remember is to inhale." It is a simple truth, and yet when read aloud, it fills the chamber with warmth, as though the valley itself has exhaled. At twilight, the light bends through the dust in such a way that the air seems to turn liquid, a slow-moving current of gold. It flows between the shelves, curls around the arches, and gathers in the center where a great stone chair sits empty. The ancients called it the seat of listening. They believed the librarian was not a keeper of books, but a keeper of stillness, one who learned to breathe in rhythm with the earth until the wind began to speak. There are stories of a wanderer who once found this chair and sat there for 3 days without food or sound. When he rose, his hair had turned white, and his eyes were filled with tears he could not explain. He left behind only a single phrase carved into the floor. "I heard my name, but it was not mine." Even now, the library endures, though its corridors shift with the wind, expanding and collapsing like lungs. When storms pass overhead, the air within trembles, and fine columns of dust rise like prayer smoke. Sometimes, faint murmurs travel through the chambers, voices without bodies, reciting fragments of wisdom, broken and beautiful. Stone forgets, breath remembers. The echoes linger for moments, then dissolve, absorbed once more into the silence that birthed them. Scholars have argued over whether such a place could exist, pointing to caverns in Cappadocia, to the sandstone cathedrals of Petra, to monastic cells in the Judean desert. But perhaps the library is not bound by geography. Perhaps it exists wherever breath is taken with reverence, wherever a word is spoken softly enough to be remembered by air. As night deepens, the valley glows with phosphorescent dust, faint as a sigh. Each mote carries a trace of memory, a sentence, a heartbeat, a name. The wind moves slowly now, curling around the arches like a reader turning pages. In that stillness, it feels as if the world itself is inhaling. Maybe that is what this place truly is. Not a ruin, but a living archive of what we have ever said, ever thought, ever breathed. A reminder that nothing spoken is truly lost, that every word remains suspended somewhere, waiting for quiet ears to hear it again. At dawn, the first light falls across the cliffs, and the dust begins to settle. The library fades into the stone that bore it, vanishing without protest. The air clears, fresh and empty once more, or so it seems. Yet when you walk away, you carry something invisible within you. A whisper not quite understood, a warmth in your chest that feels like recognition. Perhaps it is the memory of having been part of something vast and unseen. A single breath among countless others, bound together by silence. Perhaps it is simply the echo of the wind, reminding you that even air can remember. And as you leave the valley behind, each exhale feels like a story returning home, a small luminous offering to the library of breath and dust. There is a lake in the high north where winter never fully leaves. Its surface, even in summer, is glass cold, reflecting the sky with such clarity that clouds seem carved upon it. Beneath that stillness lies a secret, the remains of a monastery, its towers and courtyards preserved in the blue quiet of the deep. No one remembers when it sank. Some say an earthquake swallowed it whole, others that the monks themselves chose submersion, a surrender to silence. Yet on certain nights, when fog drapes the valley and the wind retreats behind the mountains, the lake begins to sing. The sound rises faintly from below, soft and deliberate. A single bell tolling beneath the water, not sharp, but rounded, as though the lake itself were breathing through bronze. Those who have heard it describe a vibration that hums through bone, through memory. The villagers nearby do not speak of it often. They say the bells toll only for those who have forgotten something sacred. The monastery was once known as St. Marin's Cloister, a refuge of contemplation. The monks there were artisans of sound. They believed every vibration carried a reflection of the divine. In the old writings that survived, one finds diagrams of frequencies etched beside prayers, sketches of waves curling into spirals, and notes written in ink so faint it looks like dried water. They studied resonance not for music, but for meaning, for the language beneath words. It was said that when they rang their bells, the mountain itself trembled with joy. Then came the year of floods. The river swelled beyond its banks, swallowing villages, fields, and stone. Witnesses described it not as a storm but as a rising, as if the lake itself had chosen to expand. The monks gathered within their cloister, and instead of fleeing, they continued their ritual. The oldest among them, Father Lusson, wrote in the margin of his final psalter, "Let the water come. What is faith if not the act of remaining?" When the lake finally settled, it sealed them in its blue silence. The bells fell quiet. The world above continued, centuries passing like clouds reflected in the water. But the stillness was never complete. Each year, when the thaw begins, the sound returns. Faint, melodic, sorrowful. Divers who have descended describe strange things. Murals untouched by time, candles preserved as if flame-frozen, and fish gliding through cloisters lined with moss. Most haunting of all, they speak of the belfry. Still standing, its great bell swaying imperceptibly though no current moves it. Scientists have tried to explain it. They speak of pressure differentials, of stones expanding and contracting with temperature, of trapped air pockets releasing in rhythm. Yet even they admit that the sound feels intentional. Too regular, too tender. It echoes not as noise, but as memory. Once, a young diver named Solon recorded it. The footage captured more than sound. As she hovered above the bell tower, light poured through the ice above. Ribbons of gold folding into the blue. The bell moved ever so slightly, enough for her to see dust rise like incense. And then she felt it, not heard but felt, a pulse that slowed her heartbeat to match it. She said it was not calling her downward, but inward. Her recording, played above the surface, carries no sound at all, only silence. But those who were present during the playback swore they could feel the vibration in their chests, faint as a remembered lullaby. Now, when travelers visit the lake, they approach quietly. No one speaks above a whisper. They leave offerings, not flowers but stones, placed gently along the shore. Each stone, when struck lightly, produces a different note, and when the wind moves over them, the entire shoreline hums, a fragile harmony answering the bells below. The villagers say the lake is kind, that it tolls to remind us that nothing truly vanishes. Sound, once born, never dies. It only deepens, folding into layers of air and water until it becomes something else. Resonance. Perhaps the monks knew this. Perhaps that is why they stayed, why they let the water claim them. They sought to join the eternal chord beneath creation, the one sound that holds the world together. And so, when the night is still and the stars hover low, the lake becomes a mirror of heaven. The surface quivers once, and the bell's voice rises. Not mournful now, but vast, oceanic, forgiving. It rolls through the valley like a slow heartbeat, filling every hollow, every shadow, every waiting ear. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stops. The ripples fade. The lake returns to silence. But that silence feels changed, fuller, more alive, as though the bell's song continues in a place we cannot reach. Perhaps it does. Perhaps somewhere in the deep, the monks are still singing, their voices blending with the slow pulse of the earth. Or perhaps the sound is simply the lake remembering, and the silence that follows is the world listening back. There is a plain somewhere beyond the edges of the old world, where night never feels complete, where darkness hums softly, as if in conversation with itself. The wind there carries no scent, no sound, only memory. And if you travel far enough into that silence, you will find the remains of a city that once worshipped sleep. They called it Ellora, the city beneath the stars. It was said to be built without roofs, its houses open to the heavens so that the people might dream directly under the gaze of constellations. Every street followed the pattern of a celestial map, every square aligned with the turning of the planets. For the Illyrians believed that to dream was not to escape the world, but to touch the fabric of the divine. That sleep was a sacred bridge between mortal and eternal. Stone beds carved from alabaster still rest in perfect rows among the ruins, facing upward as if waiting for their dreamers to return. In the temple at the city's heart, archaeologists found murals of men and women sleeping beneath a vast arc of stars, their spirits depicted as threads of light drifting into the sky. Beneath each painting, a single phrase repeats in delicate script: "To close the eyes is to see." At twilight, when the sun sinks behind the far dunes, the plain begins to change. The air thickens with coolness, the color of the horizon dissolving into indigo, and the first stars appear, faint, like thoughts not yet spoken. Those who camp near the ruins claim that the city stirs then, that the air hums with a rhythm like breathing. They say you can feel it through the ground, slow, steady, eternal. as if the city itself were asleep beneath the soil, dreaming still. Historians argue about its origin. Some link Ellora to ancient Mesopotamian dream temples, where priests interpreted visions brought by sleep. Others trace its symbols to forgotten Hellenic cults of Hypnos, where rest was revered as divine revelation. But these explanations always fall short. Ellora feels older than belief, as though it belonged to a time when stars and souls were still in dialogue. At night, the sky above the ruins becomes impossibly clear. The constellations hover close, each one mirrored faintly in the marble streets below. It is said that the city's architects studied the heavens not to predict fate, but to remember it. They believed that the pattern of the stars was not written above us, but within us, that every sleeper was a reflection of the cosmos breathing itself back into form. One legend tells of the night of stillness, the final evening of Ellora's existence. The people gathered in the central square, their faces turned upward, waiting for a sign. A comet appeared, immense and silent, burning across the heavens like a tear drawn in light. The citizens took it as an invitation. Together, they lay down upon their stone beds, closed their eyes, and fell into the deepest sleep the world had ever known. When morning came, there were no bodies, no trace of movement, only the faint shimmer of dust on the stones, as though light itself had touched them and vanished. The city remained, silent and intact, its wells unspoiled, its doors unbroken. And from that day onward, no one who entered the city could sleep within its walls. The wind that moves through Ellora is said to steal slumber from the living, holding it for those who never woke. Today, the site remains untouched by habitation. Scientists have measured unusual magnetic stillness there, an absence of vibration, as if the ground itself absorbs sound. Birds do not nest in the ruins, and no grass grows between the stones. Yet at night, travelers resting on its outskirts report vivid dreams. Dreams of walking through streets of light, of speaking to strangers made of silver dust, of hearing music that sounds like breathing. When they wake, they remember nothing clearly, only the feeling of being seen by something vast and kind. Perhaps Ellora was not destroyed, only transformed. Its people lifted beyond sight, still dreaming somewhere in the folds of the night sky. Or perhaps their faith was answered, and they became part of what they worshipped, their consciousness mingling with the constellations that hover patiently above. And maybe, when we sleep, it is their city we wander through, the streets of quiet stone, the bridges made of stars, the still courtyards where time does not intrude. Maybe each dream we have is a door that opens briefly into Ellora, the place where sleep and eternity are one. If so, then every nightfall is an invitation, and every dawn a gentle farewell. For just before waking, in that fragile pause where breath hesitates between worlds, there is a moment small and endless, where you can almost hear them breathing back. The city remains silent, buried in shadow and starlight, but it does not feel gone. It feels at peace. Its sleepers are still dreaming, and perhaps, somewhere beyond the veil of sky, they dream of us. It begins with a sound, a whisper softer than the wind, the murmur of water moving through reeds. Somewhere in a forgotten valley, a river glides between stones so old they have forgotten their own names. The moon follows it like a companion, pale and loyal, its reflection trembling across the current. To stand at its edge is to feel the breath of something alive, something that listens as much as it moves. The people who once lived along this river called it Anamara, which means the one who remembers. They believed that every droplet held memory, that water, unlike earth or sky, never truly dies. Changes form, yes, rises, falls, hides, returns, but it always remembers where it has been. When a loved one died, their families would speak their name into the current, trusting that the river would carry it until it reached the sea, where all memories eventually meet. Archaeologists found traces of that belief carved into the rock along its banks, spirals, eyes, and open palms facing upward. The symbols repeat every few miles, always near the oldest stones, as though the river itself were marked by those who wished to be remembered. There are ruins, too, bridges with no path leading to them, stairways descending into water, fragments of temples that seem to sink a little deeper with every generation. No one knows how long they have been there. The river reveals them and reclaims them in rhythm, as if retelling an old story to itself. At night, mist rises from the surface, curling into thin, luminous shapes that look almost human. Travelers say they hear faint voices within the fog, murmurs in languages no longer spoken, songs that break and reform like waves. The elders of the nearby villages tell of nights when the river turns still and visions appear beneath the surface. Faces, cities, forests that once stood upstream centuries ago. The river, they say, is not flowing toward the sea, but toward the past. Scientists have tried to explain it, the acoustics, the reflections, the way light moves through vapor, but such explanations dissolve when you stand beside it. There is an intelligence here that cannot be charted, something patient and circular. Even the air tastes older by the water's edge, metallic and tender, like the first rain that ever fell. There is one story, told quietly by those who remember their grandparents' voices. Long ago, a king sought to dam the river, to redirect its path for his growing empire. The builders labored for years, cutting through rock, raising walls of stone and copper. But when the final gate was closed, the river rose in silence, not with rage, but with certainty. By morning, the dam was gone, the valley reshaped, and the king's name erased from every tablet and wall. The people said the river had simply forgotten him. Sometimes, at dusk, the water changes color. For a few moments, it glows faintly from beneath, a deep amber light, pulsing like a heartbeat. Locals believe this is when the river dreams. They say that is when it remembers everything at once. Every birth and farewell, every laughter that once echoed over its bridges, every hand that skimmed its surface in prayer. Once, a scholar came to record these tales. She stayed for months, mapping currents, measuring flow, listening. She wrote of how, during a full moon, the sound of the river deepened, as if the water were speaking directly through the stones. She described the way her reflection sometimes shifted, showing not her face, but that of someone older, someone familiar she could not name. In her final entry, she wrote only this: "The water knows me." She vanished soon after, leaving her instruments neatly arranged by the shore. Today, the valley remains quiet. The river continues, unbothered by the centuries that have passed. Fishermen still bow before casting their nets, whispering names into the current. They say that if you listen closely enough, you can hear your own past moving with the flow, footsteps, voices, even dreams, carried along in the rhythm of time itself.